Thank you, Chairman. I think we'll have more than one round, too, won't we? So we'll have time to ask the questions we want to ask today. And again, Dr. Hamburg, thank you for being here. As I may have mentioned in my opening statement, Senator Shaheen and I sent a letter in November of last year about the Food Safety Modernization Act and certain sections in produce safety and preventive controls for human food rules. You're re-proposing part of those rules. Why aren't you re-proposing all of the rules so that people can see the new changes in the context of the rest of the rule that's out there?
Well, this has been a very open process where we have tried to reach out and really get input on all of the different rules. There's 7 foundational rules for implementation of this important new law. Congress gave us some very rigorous deadlines for implementation, and the courts have also weighed in as well. So we are, really pressed to move forward. At the same time, we want to get it right. And so what we have been trying to do is to listen carefully, including going out to farms and food producers across the country for meetings, visits, and listening sessions to understand where the concerns are. And there are a set of clear, targeted concerns in the area of preventive controls for human and animal feed, as well as in the produce area. And that's where we think that by reproposing, we can make a real difference. We agree with your earlier comment about this is not an arena where a one-size-fits-all model can work. We want to find practical, workable solutions that will matter to make it feasible for industry to implement these important new rules and the spirit of the Food Safety Modernization Act, but that will also make a difference for improving public health and reducing preventable foodborne outbreaks. So I think we are moving forward on a path that makes sense, that enables us to reach our common goals, but in a timely way that will matter for both consumers and for industry.
Well, I do think there's some significant merit when you repropose certain rules. Other rules that were in that package may be impacted by that as well. But I know in the Health Committee in the last month or so, a number of our colleagues were concerned that you might not be totally adhering to the administrative procedures rule, and you addressed that at some length. What I'd really like to know today is, as you repropose the preventive controls rule, that you intend to adhere to the administrative procedures rule and ensure that any new testing requirements will be subject to economic analysis and full notice.
Well, we certainly are committed to adhering to the administrative procedures rule, and we're committed to really listening to the various stakeholders as they raise issues and concerns. So, I take your comments to heart, and we will take them back to the agency to review what we're doing, and also as we shape the reproposal.
And that would include an economic analysis?
Yes,
I think that's
probably multiple economic analyses.
Right. You just mentioned the part of the rule that related to what I believe the rule may have referred to as waste. Byproducts would be another term that I would have more traditionally, I think, seen used, because the waste can wind up in places it doesn't need to wind up in if you really truly decide that this is just material that is to be discarded, as opposed to material that can be repurposed, I guess, like we repropose these rules. Last night, FDA announced that brewers' grains would be addressed in the reproposal of the animal feed rule. You and I talked about that part of the rule the other day, and since then I've thought about this with some greater thought to what we're really doing here, and I think that I think the issue is larger than brewers' grains. I think there's lots of products that, from burnt potato chips to orange peels, that are repurposed into animal feed and other things, and under all of the restrictions that we would want to have there, I'm a little concerned that the only thing that FDA appears to be revisiting right now is the brewer's grains part of the so-called waste. I think it's a bigger issue than that, and any response you'd like to have, I'd be glad to hear.
Well, I'll be honest with you that this was an issue that was only recently brought to my attention in terms of the agricultural practices. And in discussing it with the team at the FDA, there was a strong sense that this is an area of importance, that we want to support sustainable agriculture practices, and it makes enormous sense. We do believe that it can be addressed in a practical, sensible way. After our conversation about distillers' grains, I took that back, and we're looking at that. So I think we will be looking at it more broadly.
I think you really need to, because the place that these things will wind up, if we don't make the most out of products we can make the most out of, it's going to be in a landfill somewhere, and nobody benefits from that until you truly are at the point that there's no economic or societal purpose to be served by getting more out of what we have. World food needs are going to increase dramatically. That means not only do we need to think about how we produce more food, but how we more effectively use the food and food products we have. And I think this is a big issue, and glad to hear that you're going to go back and look at it again. This is everything from leftover seeds that aren't used, that are then mixed into animal feed. I think one of the major, maybe all the companies that have orange peels and citrus peels, pelletize those, and then they have found good and productive purposes for those. And again, they go somewhere that nobody benefits from more things in the landfill, particularly if there's real value left in these products. And I'm hopeful that you're going to look much more in depth at what all that really means industry-wide. Chairman, I'm out of my time, too. Commissioner, I think this is the fourth year in a row that the budget has requested these fees, and I think now they're around $220 million in new and repetitive registration and import fees. I think it's unlikely that those fees are approved. Given the choice, would you rather just have appropriated money from general revenue or have this financed on a fee basis?
Well, what matters to me as Commissioner of the FDA and to the team that's been working so hard on food safety, and what ultimately matters, I think, to our country, is that we get the job done, that we successfully implement this important law. And, from my perspective, we need the dollars, and we need the money in fiscal year 2015 as a critical year for implementation, and we need a sustainable funding stream as well. Too often, we have been in the position where there's a focus on an issue and we get some resources, and then they get cut back when the attention shifts somewhere else. So we need a level of funding that is both adequate and sustainable, and if it comes from budget authority, that would be terrific.
Do you know anything that we don't know that would make this request for fee increases more likely this time than the previous 3 times you asked for it?
Well, I think that it is true that you've seen this request before. We have had discussions with industry, and components of industry are more supportive than others in terms of user fees. It will be a discussion that will continue. Meanwhile, we are trying hard as an agency to implement this important law, and, I think we have to be realistic about the need for resources.
On the compounding resources, the CBO score, the Congressional Budget Office score, was about half what, it was $12 million. It was $12 million and declined pretty dramatically after the first 3 years of getting you up to to initiating the program. I have 2 questions, really. One is, why is this amount twice as big as what the Congress anticipated it to be? And two, the budget proposes reductions of $3.685 million in money that previously would have gone to looking at human drugs, $1.628 million reductions in biologics, a $2.88 million reduction in medical device programs, without any real understanding on any explanation on how those amounts of money that previously we thought we needed in these areas could be shifted now to compounding. So why the bigger number, and is there any explanation for the several millions of dollars shifted around internally, why you don't need it there now and did need it there before?
Well, first, with respect to the CBO question, we are really trying to better understand their estimates because, we don't think that they actually match what the needs are, and this has been an evolving area of focus, but we also think that there's some timing issues in terms of how and when they did their assessment. But so we're going to be working with them to better understand. As far as the moving money around, we are, the reductions that you note are not because they're being redirected towards the pharmacy compounding issue. We're going to be really looking across the agency and looking to find efficiencies rather than taking from other programs. But we are operating in a very constrained budget environment. And, if you ask me, do we have what we need in each of these critical program areas to do the job that we've been asked to do and that I think we must do? In most cases, I do believe that the demands outstrip the resources. So it's a very challenging time. And we are trying to, really look at programs in as clear-eyed a way as possible, focus on the critical needs and priorities, and to try to build strength in other ways, in certain instances, through partnerships and collaborative activities, through economies of scale and other efficiencies, and, by really focusing on what are the most critical and urgent needs.
In the fee area, our committee tried to do all we could to be sure you had access to the fees that you were able to collect, some of which were set aside by the sequester process. And, from an authorizing point of view, Mr. Pryor and I have both been very interested in trying to see that never happens again, but it did happen. We got those fees back. But I think you've got another $79 million worth of fees that were collected prior to 2010 that the Office of Management Budget says can't be spent. Do you have any advice, you or Mr. Cochran or Mr. Tootle, on what we could do about that so that money could actually be used to advance the purposes it was collected for?
Well, first, let me thank you for the work that you did to help address the problem of the sequestered fees, the user fees, which was very worrisome, and we're grateful for the leadership that you brought to that. With respect to the outstanding user fees in terms of past collection, you were right. I think the number is 79 million, and I think you've created a framework in terms of language that enables us to engage in discussions with OMB, and we're actively in that process because we, as I was saying in answer to your last question, we do have critical needs, and those resources could make a difference.
Right. Well, you do have critical needs, and you do have this money that's been collected for the purposes of some of these needs specifically, and I'd certainly be willing to, and have been willing to be as helpful as I could be to convince the Office of Management Budget, whoever needs to be convinced. Maybe we need to do that with some further language again this year, but we want to work with you on that. There's no reason to have that money collected as fees for a purpose not to be somehow fenced off from ever serving that purpose. So,
thank you.
Well, on that topic, I know we've had a number of Missouri families, and clearly, if the individuals involved want to find the best help they can find, and they want to find it as quickly as they can. And I'm glad you're pursuing that and hope we can find the answer to some of these possible cures, this one particularly, as quickly as it's possible to do and to safely do. On menu labeling, when do you expect the final rule to come out?
Well, sadly, this is a conversation that we've had before.
We have.
It has been a long undertaking, and as you, I think, noted in your opening remarks, what had initially seemed like a relatively straightforward undertaking, menu labeling for nutritional content, especially calories, has been much more challenging than expected. But we are moving towards a final rule, and I do believe that I will not have to come to another budget hearing and have this discussion with you. But no, I take very seriously.
Well, depending on the rule, you might have to have this discussion.
But you have raised a number of important issues over time, and issues that have also been reflected in other comments on the proposed rule. And we have received lots of comments and undertaken a thoughtful, considered analysis, and I think many of your concerns will be reflected back in the final rule.
And some of those, as you know, would include prepared food is a very small part of what a grocery store might do, a drive-through location, a delivery location where very few of the customers would ever see what was posted on the wall, no matter how many things you posted on the wall. Do you have an anticipation, once you propose the rule, how long the compliance period would be?
I actually don't know the answer to that. My colleague proposed a year. But the other thing I might just mention, I think you're probably aware, is that the menu labeling requirement applies to restaurant or restaurant-like establishments that are chains of 20 or more and have consistent menus. So that helps to narrow the focus. Not all restaurants will be asked to implement this menu labeling.
Okay, good. As the chairman's prefaced many of his questions on a very different topic, the FDA recently held a public meeting on reproductive technology. For the purpose of the meeting, in quotes, was for the prevention of transmission of microchondrial disease, ended those quotes, which involves creating an embryo using DNA from 3 parents. The advisory committee, the FDA briefing for the committee, said that the FDA recognizes that there are ethical and social policy issues related to genetic modification of eggs and embryos, and that these issues have the potential to affect regulatory decisions. However, such issues are outside the scope of this meeting. Now, my view of that would be that the ethical questions associated with the procedure should be considered before we have a lot of discussion about how you do this. I'm just wondering if the ethical bridge is outside the scope of FDA. When do you think we should have that ethical discussion?
Well, we think those discussions should be ongoing, and we are working to make sure that those discussions are engaged. We don't believe that we are the right agency to lead those discussions, and it needs to be a broader societal discussion, as well as bringing important expertise to bear. But research is going on in this area of what's called oocyte modification in assisted reproduction to address mitochondrial disease. And we undertook this public meeting in order to begin to understand what is the nature of the science and what is being done. I would add that research is being done in this country and in other countries, and it's being looked at as a policy matter in other countries of the world as well. But it's a very preliminary discussion, and we do feel strongly that the broader social and ethical context has to be addressed. And as I said, we are working to make sure that that happens, as we also, make an effort to understand what's really happening in terms of the scientific research. And of course, mitochondrial disease is a serious problem. It affects a limited number of people in this country, but for those who it affects, it is a very serious concern. And so there's an eagerness to understand what kinds of scientific opportunities might exist to address it. But we are not unaware of all of the other issues that are raised and feel that those need to be addressed as a high priority.
And I think you said you were working to ensure that the ethical questions are being addressed, though not by you.
Well, we would take part in discussion. I think this is an issue that needs broad engagement. And, certainly we would not move forward. We don't think that the science is ready to move forward based on that public meeting and in terms of moving to clinical studies. But I think that we understand the importance of these issues and the broader context for this kind of scientific research. And so, as I said, we want to make sure that all of the issues, scientific, social, and ethical, are examined fully.
Well, I would hope so, and I hope you continue to use some of your efforts and the ongoing discussions with groups who should be talking about this to do so. If the purpose of looking at this in the very narrow way you did was to see if it was just so dangerous that nobody should even be talking about it, I might understand that. But when you begin to talk about things that are this different from the way humans have always procreated and the potential of what might happen unknown, there is an ethical bridge here that we all ought to understand we're crossing, and somebody should be in charge of that discussion or ensuring that discussion happens before agencies of government decide, well, this is the only thing we really have to do with this, so we should step forward and do our part of this before society has had the kind of discussion they need to have about the ethics of this kind of science and this kind of activity. But Dr. Hamburg, I'm always really impressed by both your broad understanding of what you do and your willingness to look at things that you realize you don't understand yet, because this is a huge portfolio, and the worst person we could have doing this job is somebody who thought they had all the answers on every topic. And I think today, again, you've expressed your interest in trying to and willingness to look at things that have broader context than maybe the agency initially thought they had. And I appreciate you and your
Thank you.
responses to the questions today.